She called herself HOA President, but acted more like the sheriff of my land. It started at 5:58 a.m., when the same black SUV slammed into my mailbox, for the fourth time. They thought I'd stay quiet, like everyone else this HOA had bullied, but they forgot one thing. I'm an engineer, and out here the law still means something. From one mailbox I built the proof that brought their whole empire down by sunrise. I woke before the alarm to the taste of cold metal in the air, the kind that rides pine needles and lake fog. Redwater County was still a hush of cattle breath and water lapping the rocks. My new mailbox, approved model, silver skin, flag tight on its hinge, stood clean at the edge of the gravel like a promise that order could survive the night. I'd set it yesterday by the book, 42 inches to the bottom, set back to county spec, gravel tamped until the post spoke back with a solid thud. After years balancing concrete against rivers as a dam engineer, I know the comfort of things that hold. I was trying to keep my life small, fence lines, dock boards, coffee steam. Then the engine came. Low at first, a growl that rolled off the ridge and gathered itself. Headlights swept the rails and threw long bones of light across the dust. A black SUV slid around the bend as if the road had been poured to fit it. Tinted glass, paint polished to a mirror. Not again, I said to the cottonwoods. The vehicle coasted, lined up, and punched. Metal spoke a hard truth. Screech, crunch, a hollow thud that made the fence wires sing. The post shuddered, the box flipped, the flag snapped and skittered into the ditch. The SUV bounced, corrected, and kept going, taillights shrinking into the pale that comes before dawn admits its morning. I counted to 10. Old habit. 10 seconds to let the anger pass through, not root. In the crater of gravel the tires chewed, I pinched a curl of black paint. Fresh. Beneath it a brighter layer where a buffer had eaten the clear coat. Vanity shines like that. I knew one neighbor who loved shine and power in equal measure. Bethany Whitfield, HOA President, Queen of Harmony, bearer of a gold badge no law recognized. 2 weeks, 2 mailboxes, both at 5:58 a.m. Inside, I laid the paint chip in a saucer beside my mug and pulled the drawer with the tape measure. 42 inches, I thought. Not 41, not 43. I opened the folder with my deed, surveys, and the HOA's cheerful bylaws. The deed still smelled faintly of wet paper and time. My father's initials ghosted the margin. Paper isn't muscle, but it remembers. Truth number 1. My box sat where the county said it should. Truth number 2. Someone was aiming. Truth number 3. The first time it happened, Bethany arrived by 8 with a yellow, aesthetic non-compliance notice on a mailbox her committee approved. I swept screws and splinters into a bag and took pictures from every angle. Dawn came up the lake in tin coins. I pushed the files to the cloud and a second address I keep in case the first house burns. Redundancy is a kind of prayer. At 7:40, Ernest Walker's Ford grumbled up the road. Ernest is the sort of neighbor the valley trusts. 30 years with the county, a lifetime with the land. He climbed down, studied the wreckage, and shook his head. Same time? He asked. Same time, I said. He nudged the bent post with his boot. You call the sheriff. I will. She'll call it a mistake, he said without saying her name. He lifted the saucer, examined the paint, and tapped the deed with a knuckle like a blessing. Paper and patience, Jake. Don't give her the scene she wants. By 9, a yellow notice hung on my door. I knew the perfume before the knock, citrus money. Bethany stood in a blazer stiff enough to stand by itself, that badge catching my porch light like a preacher's smile. Oh, Jake, she said. Terrible. We're all so concerned. Your box may be non-compliant. Sightlines. Safety. 42 inches, said. Setback to code. Measure it. Her smile held, but her eyes went cold. We just want harmony. It helps when folks are cooperative. Cooperation, I thought, watching the way her gaze tried to search past my shoulder. The camera over the door blinked blue. Harmony works both ways, I said. She left heel clicks on my steps, a metronome for other people's nerves. The quiet after wasn't the good kind. It was the kind that waits. I photographed the notice, emailed it to Sarah Coleman, property rights lawyer who knows how bylaws dress up as truth, and wrote one line, again. I drove to town for another approved box. The hardware clerk didn't ask. News travels on fence wire. Back home, I set the replacement with calm hands, worked the gravel until the post settled into the earth like it had always belonged. I wiped the lens of the camera and checked the angle. The lake tossed back the sun in a scatter of silver plates. For a few minutes, it looked like peace. Evening brought a wind that combed the grass and pressed the smell of wet cedar against the screens. I watched last week's footage beside this morning's. The same arc, the same dip of hood, the same second hand. Intent lives in the repeatable. I wrote the times and distances in a notebook I keep for floods and fools. I laid the deed on the counter and turned it so my father's initials faced the window. A loon called and then held its tongue. I spoke to the empty kitchen anyway. I'll start with the true thing, I said. I'll start with paper. The house settled, an old friend breathing. The valley keeps its appointments. So do bullies who like early mornings. I set my alarm, though I knew I wouldn't need it. Out on the road, the new mailbox stood silver, plain, and perfectly lawful, a small, stubborn promise driven straight into Montana dirt. Tomorrow, I'll be waiting at 5:58. The valley keeps its appointments. So do bullies who like early mornings. I set my alarm, though I knew I wouldn't need it. Out on the road, the new mailbox stood silver, plain, and perfectly lawful, a small, stubborn promise driven straight into Montana dirt. By the second morning, the frost had come down from the ridgeline like spilled sugar. My breath hung in the air as I checked the post, still upright, still shining. For a moment, I almost believed the storm had passed. Then a shadow rolled up the hill, glossy black paint, spotless chrome, engine purring like it had something to hide. Bethany Whitfield stepped out with the kind of grace only someone sure of their power can manage. She wore pearl earrings, a blazer the color of dry wine, and that little gold HOA badge pinned over her heart, as if it were a medal for valor. Behind her, a man in khakis and a nervous smile hovered with a clipboard pressed to his chest. "Morning, Mr. Remy," she sang out, voice sugared but sharp at the edges. "I heard about your poor mailbox. Such a shame when people can't respect community property." "It's on my land," I said. "Of course." Her eyes flicked toward the road, measuring, calculating. "But harmony requires oversight. I'm afraid the board received complaints about your construction methods." She tapped her clipboard man, Marcus Reed, the HOA's vice president. He began scribbling before she even finished the sentence. "I built it to county code," I said. "Setback, height, materials, all verified." Bethany tilted her head, pretending to sympathize. "Sometimes what's legal isn't what's neighborly." She let that linger like smoke from a match. Then she did something strange. She reached into her bag and produced a yellow envelope, the color of warning. Inside, a notice of aesthetic non-compliance stamped and signed in bright ink. It claimed my mailbox clashed with the visual harmony of Willow Ridge Estates. I almost laughed. "It's a mailbox, not a mural." She smiled wider, a smile that stopped just short of kindness. "Some people misunderstand how our community works. We protect value, image, and standards. People who cooperate thrive. People who resist often find it exhausting. I could feel the air tightening between us, a stillness that made the pines lean in to listen. You're saying if I don't play along, you'll make my life harder. Oh, Jake, she said softly, as though humoring a child. I'd never threaten a neighbor. I'm simply reminding you that every community has its rules. Her perfume was too sweet for the cold air. She left the notice on my step, heels clicking a rhythm that sounded like ownership. The SUV purred away, black glass reflecting my own face in its passing. Ernest stopped by half an hour later, hat pulled low against the wind. He stared at the yellow paper. Same trick she pulled on the Johnsons, he muttered. 3 letters, 4 fines, then a foreclosure threat. They sold before the year was out. I folded the paper, slipped it into the file marked HOA harassment, and took another look at the road. A single black streak curved toward the ditch, the kind of mark left by a brake taken too late. At the end of that streak, a chip of glossy paint winked in the morning light. I drove into town that afternoon, stopping by the county assessor's office. The clerk, an old ranch widow with more backbone than patience, found my plat in a drawer the size of a coffin. She traced the lot line with a ruler. Mailbox sits square on your parcel, Mr. Remy. She can't touch it. She's trying, I said. They always do, she sighed. Just make sure you keep everything documented. They win when folks lose their temper. Back home, I printed every photo and slipped them into a binder. I labeled it like an engineer would. Incident log, Willow Ridge HOA interference, 5:58 a.m. pattern. That night, the air carried the smell of snow and something electrical, tension humming through the fence wire. I stood by the mailbox, running a gloved hand over the smooth metal. Somewhere down the road, a car idled, headlights off, watching. The next morning, the mailbox was still standing, but there was a new envelope taped to my door. Another violation, this one for improper lighting fixture orientation. The lamp above my porch. I laughed then, short and quiet. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. By evening, I'd counted 3 more yellow slips, each more absurd than the last. My grass exceeded height regulation. My truck was parked at an improper angle. The wind chime by the porch produced unapproved tonal frequencies. Bethany Whitfield was declaring war by paperwork. I sat on the porch steps as the sunset turned the lake into copper and watched the wind scatter the fines across my yard like fallen leaves. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the purr of her SUV again, steady, smug, sure of its place. I whispered to the cold air, if she fights with paper, I'll answer with proof. The first frost of November hit that night, silvering the fences and stiffening the grass that Bethany claimed was 3 inches over regulation. The yellow notices on my porch curled at the edges, brittle like old snakeskin. Each morning, a new one appeared. Improper vehicle placement, unapproved color of mailbox support, noise disturbance, possible violation. I kept them all, pinned them to a corkboard in my workshop, labeled by date and time like crime evidence. It was starting to look less like a hobbyist's garage and more like a detective's wall. By the 3rd week, I could predict the rhythm. Monday morning, violation. Wednesday afternoon, another. Friday evening, a notice of pending fines. Each one signed by the same looping cursive, B. Whitfield, and countersigned by her obedient vice president, Marcus Reed. I saw Marcus one morning, clipboard in hand, walking the line of my property as though measuring his courage. His shoes were too clean for real work. His tie sat strangled under the weight of his own compliance. "Marcus," I called from the porch, mug in hand. "You doing a survey or a sermon?" He jumped like a boy caught stealing apples. "Mr. Remy, just following up on the HOA's inspection schedule. Inspection of what? He flipped through his clipboard, pretending to search. There were reports of unauthorized structures. I smiled without warmth. You mean the birdhouse my father built 30 years ago? He didn't answer. He just scribbled something and retreated toward the street, glancing back like the trees might testify against him. That evening, the mailbox stood untouched, but I noticed new tire tracks veering close to the ditch. Black SUV tires, wide and deliberate. She was circling again, testing reactions. Inside, I filed the day's photos. Mailbox intact, tire tracks fresh, time-stamped at 5:58 a.m. A perfect pattern forming. Every 2 weeks, the same minute, the same direction. Ernest dropped by before supper with a tin of coffee and a face that said he'd seen this before. They did it to the Martinez family, he said, stirring his cup with the handle of a screwdriver. Ran them out over garage clutter. 2 years later, Bethany's cousin bought that same house for half price. She's not just bossy, I said. She's building an empire. He nodded. In this valley, control's the only currency that never devalues. That night, I sat in the glow of a single lamp, flipping through the HOA bylaws Bethany had handed me on her first visit. Every page was a minefield of vague phrases: community aesthetic, safety hazard, general welfare. Each one could mean anything she wanted. I marked the passages she'd already weaponized. Page 12, grass height. Page 15, mailbox uniformity. Page 23, noise levels. Each citation traced back to a clause so elastic it could strangle reason itself. By the end, I had underlined one line in red. All improvements must maintain the neighborhood's visual harmony. Harmony. Her favorite word. Her tool for domination. 2 days later, another notice appeared, this one nailed to the door instead of taped. Final warning. Continued non-compliance will result in legal action. The hammer mark splintered the old cedar like an insult. I took photos of the nail, the signature, the timestamp, sent them all to my lawyer friend, Sarah Coleman, with a message, pattern confirmed, need counsel. That afternoon, I heard the hum of Bethany's SUV outside. Through the curtain, I saw her parked at the end of the drive, window down, phone raised. She was photographing my mailbox like a trophy she meant to claim. I walked out slowly, every step measured. Need another angle? I called. She lowered the phone, that plastic smile stretching thin. Just ensuring compliance, Jake. Some residents struggle to keep up. Seems you've made me your full-time project. Her gaze flicked toward the house, then back to me. You could make things easier by attending tomorrow's board meeting. It's educational. I nodded once. I'll be there. Front row. That night, the wind came hard off the lake, rattling the porch light and whistling through the cracks in the old siding. I sat at my desk, printing every violation, stapling them by date, adding photos and witness notes. When I was done, the stack stood nearly an inch thick. At the top, I clipped a note. HOA activity log, pattern of harassment. As the printer cooled, I heard a faint scrape outside, metal against gravel. I stepped to the window. The mailbox stood where it should, moonlight catching on its silver skin. Then, from the bend of the road, twin headlights flared. I hit record on the exterior camera and watched. The SUV idled for a long minute, then crept forward. Too slow for coincidence, too steady for chance. The driver's silhouette, hair pulled tight, pearl glint on her ear, left no doubt. She reversed before reaching the box, the car whispering back into the dark. A rehearsal. The next morning, I met Ernest at the fence line and told him what I'd seen. He rubbed his jaw. She's testing you, hoping you'll strike first. She'll wait for me to blink. And if you don't? I looked down the road, where the mailbox gleamed like a challenge. Then I'll build something that doesn't blink. The next morning, Fog rolled off the lake in ribbons, softening the edges of fences and barns until everything looked half-dreamed. I walked the gravel shoulder, boots crunching over frost, every step tracing the quiet border between my land and hers. The mailbox stood steady, silver as a blade. I took fresh measurements: height, setback, alignment with the county road. Each number matched regulation to the inch. Bethany could twist words, but she couldn't twist math. At 9 sharp, I drove into town. The county office was a squat brick building that smelled of coffee and ink. Behind the counter sat Sarah Coleman, a property rights attorney who'd grown up here, same as me. She was sorting through a stack of zoning appeals when I dropped my binder of photos on her desk. "Morning, Jake," she said, glancing at the cover. "HOA trouble again?" "Trouble has a name now," I said. "Bethany Whitfield." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Queen of Willow Ridge. I've had calls about her. What's she up to this time?" I slid out the photographs, the tire tracks, the dented mailboxes, the timestamps all marked 5:58 a.m. She's driving into my property on purpose, then using the HOA to fine me for the damage. Sarah studied the sequence, her brow furrowing deeper with each page. "You've got a pattern here, but you'll need more than suspicion. County code might save you, though. Let's take a look." She flipped open the zoning manual, pages yellowed and frayed at the corners. Her finger traced a paragraph under residential mailbox installations, safety and compliance. Here it is. If the post is compliant with U.S. postal and county standards, any intentional destruction that can be prosecuted as property damage, not an accident. So if my setup checks out and I can prove intent, she's liable, Sarah finished. Civil and criminal. I exhaled slowly. It felt like the first breath of leverage I'd had in weeks. Then I'll make sure every inch of that box is legal, maybe more than legal. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You sound like you're planning something." "Just making sure the next time she hits it, the law hits back harder." She chuckled. "Be careful, Jake. People like her don't stop when they're embarrassed. They double down. Keep your cameras running. Document everything. And if she escalates, you call me before you lift a wrench." Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering last night's leaves across the courthouse steps. I tucked the printed codes under my arm and drove home through the cold. That afternoon, I marked the ground again, flagged distances, checked the slope where the gravel met the asphalt. I wanted it perfect. The sound of the tape reel snapping shut echoed through the valley like a challenge. By sundown, Bethany's SUV appeared at the far curve. She didn't stop this time, just slowed down long enough for the window to lower and her phone to flash, taking photos of me kneeling in the dirt. The message was clear. She was watching. Always watching. I waved to her with the county permit form in my hand. The SUV hesitated, then sped off, dust curling behind it like smoke. Later, as darkness came down over the lake, I worked in the barn. The old dam engineer habits returned like muscle memory: sketches, stress calculations, measurements scribbled on scrap plywood. The smell of oil and steel hung thick. Beneath the hum of a single bulb, I drafted the beginnings of something new. Not a weapon, not a trap, just a mailbox that could stand its ground, legally and literally. Ernest stopped by with his lantern, light flickering across the barn walls. "You sure you want to keep pushing her, Jake? That woman's got a long reach." "She's already reached into my life. I'm just setting the boundaries she ignored." He squinted at the blueprints spread across my workbench. "Looks like more than a mailbox. Let's just say I'm building for longevity." Ernest whistled low. "As long as it's by the book." "It will be," I said, tapping the printed code Sarah gave me. "Every inch of it." That night, rain swept across the valley, drumming on the tin roof. I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching headlights pass on the far ridge, each one a small pulse of threat. In my lap rested the deed, edges worn, ink faded, my father's signature faint but still proud. I thought about what he'd say if he saw how the place had changed. Neighbors at war over inches of dirt, rules used like weapons. Around midnight, the rain stopped. Steam rose from the ground, and the night smelled of wet cedar and gasoline. I went outside with a flashlight, checked the mailbox. Still upright, still shining. But footprints trailed across the ditch, high heels, deep enough to bend the grass flat. I crouched, touched the imprint. Fresh. Bethany had been here, in the storm. I followed the prints halfway up the drive until they vanished into the gravel. She'd come to look, maybe to scare me, maybe just to remind me she could. Either way, it was the wrong night to trespass. I took one last look at the mailbox before heading back inside. The beam of my flashlight caught a faint line across the post. Someone had run a gloved finger through the wet dust, tracing a single word: mine. I wiped it clean with the back of my hand. "Not anymore," I whispered. Inside, I wrote the incident down, logged the photos, and pinned the printed code to the corkboard beside the fines. Paper against paper. Law against arrogance. Tomorrow, I'd start construction, but the next morning didn't bring peace. It brought a convoy. 2 SUVs rolled up the gravel road, engines purring like twin predators. The first was Bethany's glossy black one. The second, silver and newer, bore the HOA's official logo on its side, a pretense of legitimacy. Marcus stepped out first, clipboard ready. Bethany followed, her heels clicking sharp against the frozen ground. "Morning, Jake," she said with that smile that never reached her eyes. "We're conducting an inspection, routine setback verification." I didn't request one. You don't have to. Section 4B of the HOA Charter grants us authority to verify property compliance at any time. Her voice carried the practiced confidence of someone who'd used that line to break plenty of people before me. I motioned toward the fence line. "Be my guest. Just don't touch anything." She ignored the last part. Marcus followed her into my front yard, trying not to meet my eyes. His pen scratched against the clipboard like an insect. They made their way toward the rose garden, my mother's roses, the ones that bloomed every spring despite the frost. She had planted them 30 years ago, each bush marking a birthday, an anniversary, a year survived. Bethany paused beside the first bush, lips pursed. "This garden is unconventional," she said. "It extends too close to the road. That's a violation of our visual setback code." I felt the blood leave my face. That garden's been here longer than the HOA itself. "That may be," she said, crouching down to brush her fingers through the soil. "But our records show no approved landscaping permit on file." "Because there was no HOA when it was planted," I said through my teeth. "The county approved it in the original parcel deed. I have the survey." Bethany straightened, brushing imaginary dirt from her blazer. "That deed is outdated. Our current bylaws supersede any prior informal arrangements." Informal arrangements. That was her term for family history. Marcus shuffled behind her, glancing at the rose stems bowing under his shadow. "Ma'am, should I mark this as non-compliant vegetation?" "Mark it," she said. I stepped closer, feeling the cold air cut through my jacket. "You're trespassing." "Inspection rights," she replied, all sugar again. "Just doing my duty." The word duty snapped something in me. I took out my phone, hit record, and spoke clearly, voice steady. "This is property owned by Jake Remy under County Parcel number 2114, 7B. You are conducting an unapproved inspection and damaging pre-existing flora noted on record since 1993. Bethany turned, the smile freezing mid-glint. Recording without consent is prohibited by HOA policy. County law says otherwise. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she waved her hand like dismissing a servant. Come along, Marcus. We've seen enough. When they left, I stood there in the stillness, staring at the crushed soil where her heels had broken the crust. A few rose petals clung to the heel marks like blood against snow. That evening, the first notice appeared. Landscaping within prohibited setback zone. Immediate correction required. Fine. $750. I didn't sleep. The wind beat against the windows like someone knocking without purpose. At 2 a.m, I walked out with a flashlight, sweeping it over the garden. The damage was worse than I remembered. Branches broken, soil compacted, petals scattered like confetti from a funeral. At the center of the garden, half buried under frost, I found the old survey marker my father had driven into the ground, a brass disc stamped with the county seal and the year 1993. I wiped it clean, my fingers numb. Proof. The next day, I took it to Sarah. She ran her hand over the marker like it was a relic. This, she said, is gold. It shows historical precedence. The HOA can't override county-registered features that predate its founding. That garden's legally protected. So what now? I asked. We file notice of preservation, she said. I'll draft it today. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. But by the time I drove home, the hope died on the breeze. 2 HOA trucks were parked outside my fence. Bethany stood in my garden with a tape measure and a small shovel, directing 2 hired hands as they dug along the edge of the roses. Petals and soil flew in dark arcs. I ran toward them, voice shaking. What do you think you're doing? Removing non-compliant vegetation, she said calmly. Per Section 4B authority. You're destroying a registered historical feature. She shrugged. Not anymore. The sound of metal scraping stone filled the air as her workers pried up the brass marker. Bethany picked it up between her fingers, smiled faintly, and tossed it into a bucket of dirt. Evidence, she said, belongs to the association until reviewed. Something inside me hollowed out. The roses, the soil, the stone, all of it felt like pieces of my parents being carried away. When they left, I fell to my knees in the churned earth. The smell of gasoline from their tools mixed with the scent of crushed petals and frost. My hands shook as I pressed the soil back into place, but the roots had been torn too deep. That night, I sat in my workshop with the old brass marker cleaned and shining under the lamplight. Ernest came by, silent, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He didn't ask what happened. He'd already heard. She's gone too far now, he said finally. She thinks the law bends to her. He nodded toward the marker. Then bend it back, Jake, with proof. I turned the marker over in my palm, reading the faint county engraving. My father's initials were scratched on the rim. The steel tools on the workbench gleamed in the lamplight, waiting. Tomorrow, I said, we start building something permanent. When morning came, the valley felt sharper, cleaner, like the air itself had chosen a side. The sun pushed through thin fog, catching the glint of frost on every fence wire. I walked to the edge of the road with a shovel, the weight of the brass marker heavy in my pocket. This was more than construction now. It was a line in the sand. I measured again, double-checking the specs Sarah had printed. 42 inches from ground to mailbox floor, 12 inches from the road edge, foundation not exceeding regulation footprint. Every inch, every bolt, every nail, by the book. Ernest showed up mid-morning, gray coat zipped to his chin. You sure you want to pour concrete in this cold? He asked, eyeing the cement mixer. Cold sets slow, I said. Gives it time to cure right. He chuckled, rubbing his hands for warmth. That's your father talking. I smiled faintly. He's been quiet too long. We spent the next few hours cutting rebar, welding frame sections, setting anchors deep enough to reach bedrock. Sparks flew, lighting up the barn like a forge. Each strike of the hammer echoed through the valley, a slow, steady heartbeat of resolve. By noon, the structure was taking shape. A steel core wrapped in aluminum casing, disguised to look like any other suburban mailbox. But its skeleton was forged to withstand more than mail and weather. It could handle intent. Bethany's SUV passed twice that afternoon. She slowed each time, phone lifted toward the site, recording. The first time I waved. The second, I just kept working. Her curiosity was bait. My calm was the hook. When the sun dipped low, I checked the alignment with the road one last time, then poured the first layer of concrete. The scent of wet cement mixed with the cold air, grounding everything in reality. This wasn't revenge. It was reinforcement. As the mixture settled, I wiped my gloves clean and looked up at the ridge. The lake beyond it shimmered under the last light, quiet and cold. I could almost hear my father's voice from the old dam projects. Build it right the first time, son, and you'll never need to build it twice. Inside the barn, I set up the camera rig, 3 angles, overlapping fields of view, synced to motion sensors. I tested the system twice, then again, recording a dry run to make sure every frame was time-stamped. Sarah had told me to document everything. I intended to make this my case study in inevitability. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house smelled faintly of steel dust and pine resin. I sat by the window, watching the silhouette of the new mailbox stand like a sentinel under the porch light. Every few minutes, the wind shifted, whistling through the fence posts like a warning. At 2 a.m., headlights flashed once down the road, then disappeared. I waited another 10 minutes before going out with my flashlight. The air was brittle, each breath frosting in front of me. The ground was marked with tire treads, stopping just short of the property line. Watching, not attacking. I knelt beside the new foundation, checked the bolts. Solid. Then I saw it. A small gouge in the aluminum casing. Fresh. Fingernail deep. A test. Like a thief checking the strength of a lock. Good, I whispered. Let her wonder. The next morning, I finished the outer casing. Smooth, regulation gray, the kind approved by every county in the state. I printed the certification, laminated it, and pinned it to the post with 2 stainless steel screws. The paper fluttered slightly in the wind, its seal catching sunlight. By the time the concrete cured, the mailbox looked ordinary, innocent even. Neighbors passing by wouldn't know it was built like a vault. But I knew. And so would she. That evening, I sat on the porch with Ernest and Betty Walker, the elderly widow who lived across the road. She brought coffee and the kind of calm that only age can teach. I saw her drive by 4 times today, Betty said, eyes narrow behind her glasses. She's up to something again. She's always up to something, Ernest muttered. Only question is when she'll pull the trigger. She'll do it soon, I said quietly. She can't stand not being in control. She'll come before sunrise. That's her pattern. Betty shook her head slowly. You think she'll try again after all this? She can't help herself, I said. It's not about the mailbox anymore. It's about winning. The sky burned orange, fading into purple as the night crept back across the hills. I could feel the hum of the frozen earth beneath my boots, the way it holds secrets until spring. Before bed, I walked to the edge of the road one last time. The mailbox gleamed under the porch light, solid and sure. I brushed a layer of frost off the top and whispered the same words my father once told me before a dam inspection. Let them test it. That's how you prove what's real. Back inside, I set the alarm for 5:30. The valley was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, counting down to something inevitable. Tomorrow's sunrise would settle it. The alarm cut through the dark before dawn, sharp as a blade. I woke to the sound of the wind moving through the cottonwoods and the low creak of the dock ropes down by the lake. The air was cold enough to bite. I poured coffee into a steel thermos, slipped on my jacket, and stepped onto the porch. The world was still blue, caught between night and day. A faint fog crawled up from the water, blanketing the road in ghostlight. The new mailbox stood there, quiet and patient, its steel bones hidden under its plain aluminum shell. For a moment, I admired it like a craftsman does a finished project. Everything perfect, everything by the code. At 5:50, I checked the camera feeds on my tablet, 3 live angles glowing faintly in the dim light of the kitchen. Every lens clean, every timestamp running. The microphones picked up the soft hiss of wind and the creak of tree limbs. Then came the sound I'd been waiting for. A low rumble, growing, tires on gravel. The rhythm matched the recordings from every prior incident. My pulse settled, not from fear, but from focus. I took a slow sip of coffee and stepped toward the window. At 5:57, the black SUV appeared through the mist, headlights off, gliding like a shadow across the frost. She slowed as always, the pattern too precise to be accident. Bethany Whitfield, behind the wheel, hair pinned, face cold and fixed, the queen of her own crumbling empire. I whispered, right on schedule. The SUV lined up with the mailbox, pausing just long enough to judge distance and aim. Then, with a rev of the engine, she hit the gas. The impact broke the morning. A burst of sound ripped across the valley, metal folding, tires skidding, the dull boom of an airbag detonating. The mailbox didn't move. The SUV buckled around it like a crushed soda can. Steam hissed from the hood, ghost white against the fog. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, the frantic clicking of the SUV's blinker still trying to signal a turn that would never come. I walked down the drive, slow and steady, phone recording the entire way. My boots crunched frost as I approached the wreck. The smell of antifreeze and burnt rubber hung in the cold. Through the shattered windshield, Bethany's stunned face stared back, mouth open, eyes wide, somewhere between shock and disbelief. Her voice cracked the silence. You set me up!" "No," I said quietly. "You set yourself up. I just built to code." The cameras caught every word. I circled slowly, filming license plate, angle of impact. Even the way the steel core of the mailbox remained spotless under the dented aluminum shell. The mailbox hadn't even leaned. Bethany pushed the airbag aside and stumbled out of the driver's seat, her pearl earring hanging loose. She looked around, wild-eyed, as neighbors' doors began to open along the ridge. Ernest appeared on his porch, phone already raised. Betty Walker stepped into the road, with her nightgown tucked into rubber boots, muttering, "Finally." "This is entrapment," Bethany shouted, clutching her arm. "He made that thing illegal, some kind of weapon." I kept my tone even. Mailbox was inspected and approved by county regulation 2 days ago. Signed permits on file. "You're lying." "Camera saw you approach." 5 cameras, actually. County timestamp, motion triggered. Everything saved to cloud storage. Her SUV's hazard lights blinked helplessly behind her, rhythm steady, like a metronome counting down the end of her reign. She glanced at the gathering neighbors, people she'd fined, threatened, or humiliated over the years. Every face watching her now was calm, almost relieved. "Stop recording," she yelled at them. "You can't film me." "We're on a public road," Ernest called back, voice even. "Seems fair since you've been filming us for years." Bethany turned toward me again, desperation shaking her words. "I'll sue you for damages. This is malicious intent." I pointed to the laminated code certificate still screwed to the post, fluttering gently in the morning breeze. "It's just a mailbox, Bethany. You built your own trap the moment you thought the rules didn't apply to you." Her SUV's radiator hissed louder, steam curling around us like stage fog. The moment stretched long and strange, the kind of silence that makes you realize something permanent has just changed. Within minutes, Sheriff McKay's cruiser rolled up, lights spinning blue and red through the mist. He stepped out, adjusting his hat, taking in the wreck with a slow whistle. "Well," he said, "looks like a traffic accident. But from where I'm standing, that mailbox looks fine." Bethany rushed toward him, pleading, "He made it a fortress! It's a hazard!" McKay crouched beside the post, tapped it once with his flashlight. "Concrete base, 4-foot depth, approved materials. Pretty standard. Might have been safer if you weren't aiming at it." She froze. The sheriff's gaze wasn't cruel, just tired. The look of a man who'd watched too many small wars in small towns. "Ma'am," he said, "I'll need your license, registration, and insurance." As he led her toward his cruiser, she turned once more toward me. Her voice came out low, almost a hiss. "You think this changes anything? You don't know who you're dealing with." "Sure I do," I said. "A neighbor who just hit rock bottom." The sheriff's radio crackled. Betty's phone camera kept rolling, and as the tow truck arrived, the morning sun finally broke over the ridge, lighting the mailbox like a monument. Cold, bright, unbroken. When they hauled the SUV away, the valley fell quiet again. The only sound was the faint drip of melted frost from the steel post, hitting the dirt in slow, steady rhythm. I turned to Ernest, who stood beside me with his hands in his pockets. "You think she'll try to spin this?" "Oh, she'll try," he said. "But truth's got longer legs than rumor." We both looked down the road as the sun climbed higher, burning off the fog. The mailbox gleamed like proof, simple, solid, undeniable. By mid-morning, the news had already started to spread. Ernest called it small-town radio, that invisible wire of gossip that runs faster than any phone line. Before lunch, 3 neighbors had stopped by pretending to check their fences, all trying to get a glimpse of the wreckage that wasn't there anymore. I didn't mind. Let them see it. Let the truth breathe in open air for once. Sheriff McKay had stayed behind long enough to collect statements. His notebook pages turned slowly, neat handwriting marking each detail. He looked up at me over the brim of his hat. "Footage looks clear," he said. "License plate, direction, time, every piece lines up. You did everything by the book." "I had to," I replied. "She doesn't play fair." He nodded, sliding the pen behind his ear. "Well, the law likes it when folks do." By noon, Sarah Coleman drove out from town. Her truck threw up dust as she pulled to a stop by the fence. She stepped out in jeans and a gray coat, clutching her leather case. "You really weren't exaggerating," she said, looking at the dented road and the spotless post. "That mailbox looks like it could hold back a tornado." "Tested theory this morning," I said. She half smiled, shaking her head. "I heard. The sheriff faxed me his preliminary report. Bethany's in shock, claims you engineered a hazard. We'll counter with the permits and footage. The county prosecutor already requested copies." We went inside. I poured coffee while she spread papers across the kitchen table. Photos, video stills, copies of county mail regulations. Her pen scratched as she organized each page like building a case brick by brick. "Here," she said, circling one line on the county code. "Intentional property damage, subsection 2. With video proof that's no longer civil, it's criminal." "She won't admit it," I said. Not after years of getting her way. She won't have to, Sarah replied. The footage does the talking. We watched the clips on my tablet. 3 camera angles, synced perfectly. The black SUV creeping through the fog, lining up the shot, then flooring it. The impact, the airbag, the stillness afterward. Sarah's face stayed calm, but her jaw clenched as the crash replayed in silence. People like her, she said softly, think power is the same as permission. Outside, a car door slammed. Betty Walker shuffled up the steps, holding her phone like a reporter clutching evidence. You won't believe this, she said breathlessly. It's online. The video. My grandson uploaded the footage from his live stream. Folks are sharing it like wildfire. Sarah raised an eyebrow. How many views? Thousands, Betty said. Comments too. People calling it justice in real time. I glanced out the window. A few neighbors stood on the roadside watching the mailbox with folded arms and quiet smiles. The kind you see at a memorial or a miracle. They couldn't tell which yet. By evening, local reporters had started calling. I didn't answer any of them. The phone kept buzzing, though, a relentless hum of curiosity. Bethany, meanwhile, was silent. Her house at the top of Willow Ridge sat dark, blinds drawn. The HOA's online portal, once full of notices and threats, went offline without warning. Even Marcus Reed hadn't shown up for his daily clipboard rounds. That night, as I sat on the porch, Sarah joined me. The air was cold, crisp enough to hear the lake cracking under thin ice. The mailbox stood in the glow of the porch light, unbent, unbothered. She's not done, Sarah said finally. People like Bethany don't surrender. They regroup. She'll file counterclaims, maybe say you built a reinforced obstruction. I'll need your measurements, material receipts, everything. I've got it all in the binder, I said. Every screw, every spec. She smiled faintly. You really are an engineer. I looked out at the road. No, I'm just a man tired of being pushed. The quiet stretched between us, filled only by the rustle of dry grass. Down the road, headlights glowed. Another car slowing near the mailbox. I stiffened, but this time it wasn't the black SUV. It was the sheriff's cruiser. McKay stepped out, hand resting lightly on his belt. Evening, folks, he said. Figured I'd stop by. Got confirmation from the county attorney. Bethany's insurance denied her claim. They're calling it deliberate misuse of a motor vehicle. Sarah leaned forward. So it's official? He nodded. Official enough. She's liable for damages, repairs, and legal costs. Might be she'll lose her seat on the board, too. They're holding an emergency meeting Friday. Betty, who had lingered by the fence, let out a small cheer. About time someone held her accountable. McKay gave me a look that carried more sympathy than judgment. You did what the law allows, Jake. Nothing more. Still, it's something when justice actually lands where it should. After he left, the 3 of us stood in silence, watching the last of the daylight fade. I thought of all the weeks of noise, the notices, the fear, and how quiet the valley felt now. Too quiet, maybe, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Sarah gathered her papers, sliding them back into her case. Friday will end this, she said. But expect a storm before it does. I nodded. Storms I can handle. She paused at the door, glancing back at the gleaming post in the yard. It's strange, isn't it? She said. All this over a mailbox. I shook my head. Not just a mailbox. It's about control and who finally said no. When she drove off, I stayed outside until the stars burned bright. The valley smelled like thawing earth and cold steel. Somewhere up on the ridge, a window slammed shut. I looked at the mailbox, proud and silent. For the first Time and months, I felt the balance tip, not in anger, but in truth. By Friday morning, the HOA hall was packed tighter than a barn during a hailstorm. Every folding chair was taken, every wall lined with people who'd spent years ducking Bethany Whitfield's notices. Some clutched their own yellow papers like old wounds. Others just came to see if the rumors were true, that the Queen of Willow Ridge had finally hit the wall she built for everyone else. The air inside buzzed with a nervous energy. Old ceiling fans rattled overhead, pushing the scent of coffee and winter coats through the room. I sat near the front, binder in hand, with Sarah beside me and Ernest standing guard by the back door. Betty Walker sat 2 rows over, her phone ready to record, her smile sharper than it had been in years. At exactly 10, Bethany entered. No pearls this time, no smile. Just a dark suit and a stack of folders clutched tight like a shield. Marcus Reed trailed behind her, eyes down. She took her place at the head of the long table, the gold HOA badge still pinned to her lapel, but tarnished by the week's headlines. She rapped the gavel twice. "This emergency session," she said, voice tight, "is to address recent events involving property destruction and alleged misconduct." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Sarah leaned toward me, whispering, "She's going to play victim. Watch her pivot." Bethany cleared her throat. "Certain individuals have exploited this community's trust for personal gain. A mailbox incident has gone viral, misrepresenting the facts. This man," she gestured toward me, "constructed a dangerous obstruction, fully aware it could cause harm. The HOA bears no liability for his actions." I stood slowly, binder under my arm. Dangerous obstruction? Sheriff McKay's report says otherwise. You've seen the footage. The mailbox was legal, permitted, inspected. Bethany smirked faintly. "Footage can be edited." Betty's voice rang from the crowd. "Then explain the live stream, honey. Half the county watched you plow into that post like it owed you money." Laughter broke through the tension, quick and sharp. Bethany's face reddened. "Mrs. Walker, please." But Betty was already pulling up the video on her phone, projecting it to the hall's small screen. The crash replayed in silence. The SUV lunging forward, the mailbox standing unshaken, the crowd of onlookers afterward. The image froze on Bethany's stunned face behind the airbag. "This," I said, stepping forward, "isn't about a mailbox. It's about power. Every family in this room has been fined, threatened, or forced into compliance for things that never broke a single county law. The HOA wasn't protecting property values. It was protecting control." Ernest added from the back, "She fined the Martinez family for having wind chimes, said they created acoustic pollution. Then her nephew bought their house." Murmurs spread, then voices. A woman near the wall raised a folder. We're fined for a paint shade that was too cheerful. She told us to repaint or face foreclosure." Another man stood. "We paid $2,000 in penalties for a fence 3 inches too high. Turns out her brother was the contractor who replaced it." Each accusation hit like hammer blows. Sarah handed me a copy of a financial audit she'd uncovered. Bethany's signature on invoices, inflated charges, payments funneled through community improvement fees. I placed the papers on the table. "This is proof," I said. "Forgery, misuse of funds, selective enforcement. And the cherry on top? Criminal damage to private property." Bethany's mask cracked. "You think you can come into my neighborhood, my system, and tell me how it runs?" "It's not yours," I said softly. "It never was." The crowd erupted, not with anger, but applause. A tired, cathartic sound that filled the hall like wind through dry grass. For the first time, Bethany looked small. Sheriff McKay entered from the back, hat in hand. "Afternoon, folks. County clerk asked me to deliver this." He handed Sarah a sealed envelope. "Preliminary findings from the State Property Board." Sarah broke the seal and read aloud. "Effective immediately. The Willow Ridge Homeowners Association's current leadership is suspended pending full investigation of fraud and abuse of power. Gasps filled the room, Bethany's face drained of color. You can't, Marcus stood abruptly. I resign, he said, voice shaking. I'm done being part of this. He dropped his clipboard on the floor, the papers scattering like leaves. Bethany turned toward him, desperate. Marcus, you can't walk away now. He didn't answer. He just kept walking, past her, past the gavel, out the door into the bright, cold morning. Betty stepped forward, her voice steady. We'll be voting then. Who here wants to keep this HOA under the same management? Not a single hand rose. The vote of no confidence was swift and unanimous. The gavel fell one last time, not from Bethany's hand, but from Betty's. The sound echoed like closure. As the room emptied, Bethany stood frozen behind the table, staring at the fallen papers that bore her name. They were just pages, but they looked heavier than stone. Outside, the crowd gathered around the mailbox, still standing proud, a quiet symbol in the morning sun. Ernest leaned against his truck, lighting a cigarette. Guess you finally built something unbreakable, Jake. I smiled faintly. Built it for the right reasons. Sarah joined us, tucking the official order into her briefcase. They'll dissolve the old board by next week. The state will appoint interim oversight until new elections. And Bethany? I asked. She'll face charges, Sarah said. But the real sentence is already served. She lost her audience. The valley wind picked up, carrying the smell of thawing pine and gasoline from the tow, yard up the road. The neighbors talked quietly, laughter mingling with relief. For the first time in years, Willow Ridge sounded like a neighborhood again. Weeks passed, and the snow melted into the soil, feeding the rose garden that had somehow survived the frost. New buds pushed through black earth, resilient, bright, stubborn, the kind of beauty that doesn't ask permission. I spent my mornings pruning the damaged stems, the same way my father had once taught me. Kneel, clear the rot, let the healthy branches breathe. Each snip of the shears felt like cutting away the memory of those yellow papers. The fines were gone. The fear was gone. What remained was silence, but the good kind. The kind that means peace, not absence. The mailbox stood at the edge of the road, gleaming under spring light, its steel heart hidden beneath paint and code. The county had inspected it twice, both times giving it a perfect report. It had become a landmark of sorts. Cars slowed when they passed, drivers lowering their windows just to look. Someone had even left a small bouquet of wildflowers at its base. One morning, I caught Betty Walker sitting in her car nearby, sketching the mailbox in her notebook. She waved. They're calling it the Fortress Post online, she said, laughing. Whole forums of folks asking for blueprints. I grinned. Let them build their own. Just make sure they read the county code first. Already told them, she said, tapping her pen. Justice only lasts when it's built by the book. The new HOA board, led by Betty, with Ernest as treasurer, met for the first time that month. They invited me to speak, though I didn't say much. The agenda was simple. Drop all pending fines, restore community spaces, and set up an appeal process for anyone wronged by the old regime. There were no threats, no hidden clause in the language, just neighbors trying to rebuild what control had broken. Sarah Coleman stopped by afterward. You know, Jake, she said, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, you could have sold this place, moved on. Most people would have. I looked out toward the lake. The water shimmered under the early sun, calm but alive. This land's not just dirt to me, I said. It's memory. It's what my parents left behind. You don't sell history just because someone writes you a citation. She smiled softly. That's why you won. From up the ridge, a moving truck rolled slowly past Bethany's old house. The shutters were open for the first time in months, curtains fluttering like surrender flags. A young couple stood in the yard, pointing at the view of the lake. They waved when they saw me. New life had arrived where fear used to live. By late afternoon, I was fixing a hinge on the barn door when Ernest came by with 2 beers. "To surviving tyranny," he said, handing me one. "To paperwork and patience," I replied, clinking the bottles. He chuckled. "Funny, isn't it? After all that noise, peace feels almost strange." "Strange," I said, "but right." The sun began to set, washing the valley in amber light. Birds darted across the sky, and somewhere down by the dock, a frog began to sing. The sound mixed with the creak of wood and the slow roll of water against the shore. I walked out to the road one last time before dark. The mailbox caught the dying light, its paint glowing faintly orange, like embers cooling after a long fire. I traced my hand over the smooth metal, feeling the faint warmth from the sun still clinging to it. A plaque I'd welded to the side read, "Built to code, built to last." The words felt less like pride and more like a lesson, the kind that doesn't fade with time. When the breeze shifted, I could hear laughter echoing down the valley, children riding bikes, dogs barking, the sound of neighbors talking without fear of fines or forms. It wasn't perfect, but it was free. I headed back toward the porch. The roses rustled in the wind, their petals catching the last light before dusk swallowed the ridge. Somewhere, in the quiet hum of that evening, I thought I heard my father's voice, steady, proud, reminding me that the strongest structures aren't made from concrete or steel. They're built from standing your ground, 1 inch of truth at a time. The stars came out slow and steady. I sat on the porch steps, coffee growing cold beside me, watching their reflections dance on the water. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it arrives with the soft sound of wind over a steel post and the quiet knowledge that bullies break themselves on what's built to endure. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's just the sound of peace finally settling back in. If you've ever stood your ground against an unfair HOA or neighbor, drop a justice in the comments so we know you're out there. And if stories like this remind you that truth still matters on American soil, stick around. Hit that subscribe and join me for the next fight for fairness and land.